Good morning everyone, I am Rosy Saikia. I am a doctoral student at IIT Guwahati and I am from India. Today I am here to present my paper entitled Image and Beyond, a rereading of Basho's Haiku. Matsuo Basho was one of the most widely read Japanese poets of the 17th century. His poetry is a distinctive example of extremely short poetic forms in the history of world literature. Haiku seeks the reader's own involvement and elucidation, without which it would appear unimpressive. It has a lot in common with the images poetry of 20th century and inspired the later. Even Ezra Pound acknowledged about the fact in his work. Basho appeared on the scene soon after the so-called Dark Age of Japanese literature. The uniqueness of Basho's haiku lies in his use of imagery and symbols. This paper attempts to see the images in Basho's haiku and how it goes beyond the appeared one. The images in Basho's haiku transcend the reality of life, which can be only attained by the supreme level of consciousness. Basho strove to place his reader within an experience whose unfolding might lead to revelation, the eternal wrested from the phenomenal world. As a mystic, Basho believed in two concepts of life. Nirvana, which means a transcendent state of mind where there is neither suffering nor desire, even no sense of self, and samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth. Because he knew the unconditioned was attainable only within the conditioned. What is striking in Bashos is that he expressed an observation of a natural, often commonplace event in a plainest diction without any verbal trickery. The effect is one of spareness, yet the reader is aware of the microcosm related to the transcendental reality. Basho's discussion of poetry was always touched by Zen thought, and he advocated the realization of Muga, or self-forgetting. He believed that poetry was a way to forget about oneself, allows one to merge with the natural world. Through poetic juncture, one may become any of the elements of nature like rock, water, stars, and leads one to an enlightened frame of mind known as Muga, or a loss of awareness of oneself. In this world of technology, it seems quite irrelevant to make an escape from the worldly affair, but at some point it makes sense with the fact that it allows us to break free from the ceaseless longing and incompleteness which otherwise haunts all human lives. We can see how Basho's concept of Muga, or self-forgetting, invites us almost to dwell in everyday subjects, even if they are some rather unpoetic dead fish. Here goes one Basho's lyric: fish shop, how could the lips of salted brim? The fish shop is presented here by Basho as simple as possible, which reminds us of an actual scene with all its daily life associations in smell, sound, and sight. Another poet would have ended the poem with something bold and striking, or philosophical, even religious. Basho, however, says a fish store only just to give his reader an essence of the subject and giving them a scope to relate with the same, forgetting about their own. That is the uniqueness of Basho, where an ordinary subject of daily life becomes extraordinary by the interpretation of readers. Basho suffered from long periods from deep melancholy. He traveled the dangerous back roads of the Japanese countryside with little more than writing supplies, and he spent some truly discreet nights. Fleas and lies biting, awake all night, a horse pacing close to my ear. Yet Muga freed Basho, and it can also free us from the tyranny of glum moments of individual circumstances. His poetry constantly invites us to appreciate what we have and see how tiny and unimportant our personal difficulties are in the vast scheme of the universe. Basho's poetry was a clever tool for enlightenment and revelation, through a skillful yet simple arrangement of words. These poems are valuable not because they are beautiful, but because they can serve as a catalyst for some of the most important states of the soul. They remind both the writer and the reader that contentment relies on knowing how to derive pleasure from simplicity and how to escape the tyranny of being ourselves. Even a tough and unpleasant situations of life can be tolerant through nirvana. 20th century modern German poet Reiner and Maria also believed that experiencing pain is much needed to be creative. The term experience remained quite significant for Rilke throughout his creative venture. He emphasized on experiencing everything in life, even solitude and pain, to be inventive. He realized that everything on art could not be beautiful, and his ability to digging out beauty amidst all ugly and transforming that into creative spirit made him different than any other poet. In his own words, for the creative artist there is no poverty, nothing insignificant or unimportant. The striking similarity between Basho and Rilke is that both of them picked up some ordinary things of daily life and attempted to relate it to life situations and beyond. Basho was able to achieve a unity of life and art, the great hope of Jain creators, but he did not believe in the modern idea of art for art's sake. Instead, he hoped that his poetry would bring his readers into special mental states valued by Jain. What is important, he wrote, is to keep mind high in the world of true understanding, then returning the daily experience, seek therein the true and the beautiful. No matter what the activity of the moment, we must never forget it has a bearing on everlasting self. Basho cautioned fellow haiku poets to rid their minds of superficiality by means of what he called karumi, that means lightness. The ultimate goal of his lightness was to allow reader to escape the burdens of the self, one's petty oddness and circumstances, in order to experience unity with the world beyond. Basho believed that at least poetry could do that. At its best, allows one to feel a brief sensation of merging with the natural world. A poet can express and can reach the other world sailing through his poetic sojourn. Basho's mature haiku style shofu is known only for karumi, but also for other Jain-inspired aesthetic ideals, sabi and wabi. Sabi implies contented solitariness, and Jain is associated with early monastic experience, when a high degree of detachment is cultivated. Wabi can be described as the spirit of poverty, an appreciation of the commonplace, and is perhaps most fully achieved in the tea ceremony, which, from the simple utensils used in the preparation of a tea to the very structure of the tea hut, honors and humble. Basho intertwined his poems so closely around this feeling of lightness that at times he dared ignore time-honored elements of the form, including the syllabic limitations. The following one amongst his greatest consists of original of 18 syllables. On the dead limb squatched a crow, autumn night. Jain Buddhism is a specific form of Buddhist practice and through thought, which history of origin goes back to Chinese Chan Buddhism and was developed in Japan in the 13th century. It focuses primarily on intuitive insight and realizing one's own Buddha nature. Buddhism has been credited with introducing art to Japanese society, and haiku can certainly be linked to Buddhist ideals of beauty and simplicity. Basho is one of the famous haiku reads. Breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into water, a deep resonance. Through this short lyric, Basho illustrates several key concepts of Jain Buddhism: impermanence, immediacy, and non-duality. Jain Buddhism arose out of Mahayana tradition, which promotes the importance of understanding shunyata or emptiness. It emphasizes that because nothing is permanent, because everything is shunyata, one must not fall prey to the illusion of clinging to what is not there. Haiku's brevity gives a sense of fleeting, which is ultimately reflective of shunyata. Traditionally, haikus contains 3 parts, 2 images and a concluding line which helps to juxtapose them. The best known haiku in Japanese literature is called Old Pond by Basho himself. Old pond, leaf splash, a frog. Here the poet grounds the reader with a familiar image, a trusted image of something nice to think about. He lulls the reader into thinking this is going to be an easy haiku. With the words jumps into, the reader's mind is jerked around with the thought that something is happening. At the end of the line, one wonders why is coming next, and then Basho springs his brand new idea, the sound of water, which is rather common but is uncommon in this connection. There is a paradox here. Is the frog jumping into water or sound? Can it jump into one without the other? These reverberations of thinking are what make a haiku so interesting. Basho laughed and needed solitude, which was again a reflection of Zen Buddhism. Even Rilke, in the series of letters wrote between 1903 and 1908 to his friend Franz Kapoj, he had clearly expressed his longing for solitude and silence. Many times in life, Rilke kept himself abandoned from society and moved to quiet places like a modest room or an old summer house. He enjoyed silence and considered that as a rare gift. Similarly, there were some points when Basho found visitors no longer bearable, so he would keep his gate locked. Morning glory trailing, all the gate bolts fastened. All his life as a wanderer, Basho took full advantage of the safe conduct important to the traveller of his day and mobility Zen priesthood offered. He gave up virtually all possessions, his only concern spiritual and artistic discovery. Critic Koji Kwamoto has given a structure of Basho's haiku. He has stated, "In my view, Basho's haiku is composed of two parts, base section and superposed section. The base section is a verbal segment carrying a noticeable stylistic interest, a hint of anomaly in the flow of words, which promotes the reader to search behind them for their hidden meaning. The superposed section, on the other hand, is normally a briefer segment which, in conjunction with the base section, gives the reader an indirect orientation to the plausible significance of the entire piece." Another lyric of Basho reads, "In this mountain village, manzai dancers are laid, plus bosoms." Kwamoto argues that the anomaly in the base section is incongruity in stylistic level between mountain village and manjai. The superposed section plum blossoms is also an important poetic word which leaves readers in a perplexed state. Haiku and images poetry of the 20th century have a lot in common. Haiku played a vital role in the formation of the latter. For example, they are both short. They make full use of what Ezra Pound calls the technique of superposition, setting one idea on top of another. And finally, like most avant-garde works of art, they are basically open in the sense propounded by Umberto Eco, that is, they have flexibility in validating the widest possible range of interpretative proposals. In the early 20th century, Ezra Pound and the Images movement adopted Japanese haiku because it provided a form that presents an intellectual and emotionally complex in instances in time. Imagism has inherited its bent towards openness from French symbolism, Japanese haiku, and classical Chinese poetry. It owes its extreme shortness and suggestive laconism mainly to the latter two, and the idea of superposition to haiku and Chinese written characters. For the imagist, image is simply a sort of metaphor which tenor is unnameable, having never been enunciated before in abstract terms. The imagists had discovered a poetic form well suited to their minimalist objectives. In September 1914, in his article entitled Vorticism in the Fortnightly Review, Ezra Pound reiterated these key premises as follows. Direct treatment of the thing, whether subjective or objective, to use absolutely no word that does not contribute to the presentation. Ezra Pound's poem In a Station of the Metro appeared in Poetry Magazine 1913, as did a guideline to the key beliefs in the Imagist movement. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. By linking human faces, a synecdoche for people themselves, with petals on a damp bough, the poet calls attention to the elegance and beauty of human life, as well as its transience. A dark, wet bough implies that it has just rained, and the petals stuck to the bough were shortly before attached to the flowers from the tree. They may still be living, but they will not be for long. In this way, Pound calls attention to human mortality as a whole. We are all dying. Here again, Pound too resembles Zen Buddhism in the treatment of life. The beauty and the transience of life coexist in this poem. We find certain similarities when we compare Pound's lines with those of Basho. Both poems are of similar length and both are composed of two distinct parts. The first part is a simple description of a particular phenomena observed by the poet. The second part is a clear image of entirely different phenomena, which has been evoked in the mind of the poet by some analogy to the first. Each part contains a distinct image in itself, and the relation between them is one of the both comparison and contrast. But the major difference lies in the openness. The imagists were on the horns of a painful dilemma. They wanted to open up their poetry, yet the fear of being inconclusive forced them unconsciously to turn to association for help. Some sort of allusion, it would seem, is indispensable for density in a short poem. This dilemma of a modern man or thought restricts imagist poetry to equate with haiku. The imagist poems were too self-explanatory and lacked the ability to draw on the specific cultural conditions that make haiku possible. In the Japanese tradition, literary allusions are made to other texts spanning many centuries by use of single character. Thus, we can see that the imagists used the images and the openness of the short form primarily as a means of exploration. Despite all the problems involved, their inventive technique of superposition by using bold metaphors to give concrete shape to fresh perceptions of reality allowed them to challenge all existing methods of analysis and description. The openness of haiku, however, leads to no such total refurbishing of established worldviews. In haiku, one is permitted to play freely with indeterminacy, secure in knowledge that sooner or later any poem can be reduced to topics sanctioned by centuries or traditions. Thank you, and you can refer to my soft hard copy for any inquiries.